Andrew is joining us from the West Coast this evening, and we're very grateful for that. I don't know how many of us you can see, but people waved at you. And,
yeah, I can see a couple.
Yeah, and so I actually had the privilege of seeing at least a variation of this talk at a content strategy conference this past summer, and was so impressed by it that I found Andrew after, and I was like, you must come talk to us. Just because the way that product writing and product design interacted and the way he presented it I thought was really compelling and would make all of us here better designers and thinkers and hopefully writers too. So without further ado, I will hand it to you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I rearranged our whole bedroom to look like more academic, so like behind me. So that's good, but the bad thing is someone's doing construction like upstairs, so if the audio gets bad, we'll figure something out, but this is my apology in advance. Anyway, yeah, I'm Andrew. I'm a senior UX writer at Slack, and I'm going to give a talk to you all that really is in some ways, was originally sort of targeted at writers, and it's not a talk about like why UX writing is important, really. It's a talk about how to do it, and there's tons of literature you can read around why it's important. Especially lately, I feel like there have been a lot of Medium posts by designers who like discover UX writing or something, and so there's lots, I think that's covered. But instead I want to talk about how we think about it at Slack, what the craft is, and also a lot about just like how a designer and a writer work together. And we're going to talk about all that. But first, I want to show you my favorite short film. I hope you know this one. This is The Powers of Tin by Ray and Charles Eames. It's a short film, I love it. It starts on this picnic in Chicago, and then the camera zooms back, and every 10 seconds it zooms back by 10 times the distance, right? So it starts on this picnic in Chicago and these two people, but pretty soon you're looking at all of Chicago. And then Lake Michigan kind of creeps in, and soon, you know, like Indiana is there now, that's where I'm from, and soon you're looking at Earth as a planet. And then it keeps going back, and we get back to our solar system, and eventually the Milky Way galaxy, right? And then at the end of the film, it kind of rapidly crashes back through all of that. So through the galaxy, down through the solar system, through all these levels of scale, and back to that picnic. And this time it goes even further. It goes into the hand of the guy, and down and through some DNA to a single atom, and then to the center of that thing. And I love this short film. And what I love about it is, I love this way of thinking about systems, right? Like in this short film, the system is the universe, and it's sort of dissecting it in terms of levels of scale. I love that way of thinking about a system. I love how in the film you get to see some places where there's like an eerie sort of similarity between different levels of scale. I love how the interior of the atoms spinning around has this interesting echoes with like the planets in our solar system orbiting the sun. But then also I love how there are levels where it's wholly unique, right? Like nothing else in the universe is like that Chicago picnic. And so a silly idea I had was, what if we did exactly that, but for UX writing? What if we started from the most sort of basic and irreducible particle? What if we started from writing for buttons, and then we sort of zoomed out to cover everything else? And so that's the interesting conceit of my talk. And here's what I think those levels look like. I think we should start with microcopy, because there's nothing more basic than this. There's nothing smaller. And we'll talk about some ways to do that well, and ways that it's different from writing other things. And then we'll zoom out and talk about how you work with a designer. And this is, I think, the most important relationship a writer has, is their relationship with a designer. Each relationship is wholly unique. It's that Chicago picnic, it's those two people. We'll zoom out again, and we'll talk about crafting user flows. And that's kind of, I think, the heart of the work of a UX writer. And it's the place where UX writing becomes more than just copywriting. And finally, we'll zoom out one more time, and we'll talk about how to go about establishing a UX writing team. I think this is an interesting topic right now, because so many companies here in the Bay Area anyway are doing this for the first time. Like big companies are figuring out, hey, we should have a UX writing team, and how does that work, and what should that do? So I'll talk about how we've done that at Slack anyway. Cool. Let's get started. Writing microcopy. Mostly writing microcopy, it feels like writing other things. There are drafts, there are blank pages, there is anxiety that goes along with drafts on blank pages. But there are a few really key differences. And so like a big one is that users are not really an audience. I mean, they are your audience, I guess, in the sense that they're gonna read your work and or sort of skim over it, but they're not here to read your work, right? They're here to accomplish a task. And honestly, most of the time that users are noticing the stuff we've written, it's because their task has kind of gone off the rails. You know, they've hit an error, they've hit a dead end, or just the flow is confusing and hard to navigate. And so suddenly they're relying on words to kind of get through. Another big difference is that UX writers are usually working on cross-functional teams, right? So the people who are giving you feedback aren't other writers. They're a designer and like a PM and marketers and researchers and engineers. And that feedback tends to look pretty different from the kind of feedback writers give each other. And so I think as a UX writer, you have to learn how to navigate that. And then finally, one really big difference between writing microcopy and writing other things is just that it's weirder and there's jargon. Like you write about nonsense words, like you are writing about retweets or faves or something, and it's just, there's a lot of jargon to wade through. And so we have to be aware of that, and we have to try to do that well and maybe try to reduce the burden that jargon brings with it. So some key differences, right? And because of that, I wanted to bring a few handy rules for writing microcopy. I have 4 of them. This is not like an exhaustive list, and there are many more than this. These are just my favorites. So cool. The first one, and this is the most important one, is to be radically human. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wow, radically is not the word I would have chose there. That's a weird word. And it is a little kind of clunky, but I like that. I hope that it's memorable for that reason. I hope it's like a thorn in the eye or something, because this is important. I want to be really clear that writing in a way that is human does not necessarily mean writing casually. It can mean that, right? The tone could be casual. But humans talk about a lot of things in a lot of different contexts, and your goal as a writer is to try to write in a way that sounds like how another human would explain something if they were in the situation that the user's in right now. So if a user's an IT administrator and they're dealing with something kind of technical, your writing is going to have to deal with something technical. But your goal is to sound like a human talking about that and explaining that, as opposed to sounding impenetrable. This is hard, and you have to choose to kind of do it like actively every day. The longer you're at some given company, or just the longer you're in tech, the more you'll convince yourself that pieces of jargon are actually just fine, or actually just totally normal words. So at Slack, or like in Slack, the product, a key part of the product is there are things called channels, and a channel is just like a chat room where it's organized around a topic and people can hang out and work. If you work at Slack, or if you've used IRC, it's easy to convince yourself that the term channel is something everyone knows. Because come on, it's so basic. But people definitely do not. I can tell you from much user research, people do not know that word. And that's just the thing we have to remind ourselves every day is like, yeah, our jargon is our jargon. It's not something we should expect our users to know. A kind of dumb but easy trick for writing in a way that feels human is just to read your work out loud. Or better yet, have someone else read it out loud. And this can feel kind of silly, but your goal is really to not write tongue twisters. Your goal is to make the thing easy to read. And I should have dug up the link to this, but there's some study I read about recently that has shown that the same portions of the brain that control tongue movement light up when you're reading something. And so it looks likely that things that are hard to say are also taxing, at least, to read. Even just when you're reading yourself. So anyway, that's rule number 1. Rule number 2. We have like a unique problem at Slack, I think, or at least unique amongst enterprise software companies, which is that Slack's voice and its brand is known for being kind of playful and kind of willing to engage with users in a more casual, playful, maybe witty way. And that's a great thing. But I think a lot of enterprise software companies, the UX writer would kind of have to fight for the chance to write something playful. They have to argue for that chance. And at Slack, we have the opposite problem, where everyone at Slack is so into the idea of our brand and our voice and our tone that as writers, we're often trying to convince PMs and designers and marketers that like now is not the time to crack a joke. No, this is an error message that says Slack is down, let's not make a joke right now. And so we needed some way of thinking about this. And our framework is this. Our framework is, we never want to try to make a moment happen. We never want to try to make something a celebration or make something funny. Instead, we want to look for places where we can tell the user is already feeling something and then just kind of lean into that or just be a part of it a little bit. So for example, in Slack, you can add reactions, little emoji reactions to messages that other people send. So you can like, if it's a funny message, you can put a little laughing face on it. And your whole team can put emoji on a thing. But it turns out there's a limit to the number of emoji that you can put on these things. The limit's arbitrary. There's just a limit because we needed one. And one day I was asked to write an error message for that limit. And at first I was stumped. It was kind of hard because it was just arbitrary. You know, it's not really a bug or something. It's just, hey, this is the limit. And then I realized something. I know something about the users in this case. If a team's added 50 emoji to a message, I know something about their state of mind. I know that they're having a laugh. I know they're having fun. And since I know that, I can lean into that a little bit, or even just shine a light on it, or just kind of acknowledge it. So we wrote, for that error message, we wrote a few rotating ones. This is one that I like. And what I like about this one is that Twitter liked it. But the other thing I like about it is there is something, this is an aside, there's something funny. If you're trying to be funny and you're writing for software, sometimes the funniest thing is just explaining software because software is weird and messy. So anyway, this worked, and the reason it worked is because we knew kind of the state of mind our users were in. So anyway, next little tip here. Hopefully anyone who writes knows this, but I love when another writer asks me to edit their work, because when you're editing someone's work, there's like a strange phenomenon that happens, which is that you can look at something that someone else has labored over for 2 weeks, and if you know what they're going for, you can look at it and just immediately know how to make it better. And you look like a genius. Like, you look like a genius, but you're not, or like you're probably not. But what's going on here is that you have some distance from the thing. You have fresh eyes, and you can help out. And so you should do that for your coworkers, and you should let your coworkers do that for you. Share your stuff early and often. Don't spend 2 weeks on some single dialog box, because then you'll be too embarrassed to share it anyway. Yeah. And finally, I think this is like something we definitely believe at Slack, but I know other companies don't necessarily agree with. I think clarity is more important than brevity when it comes to UX writing. So being able to write briefly a set of instructions to fit them on a button or in a little label, that is a skill that UX writers have or need to have. It's a skill, but it's not the ideal state. The ideal state isn't the shortest possible string. The ideal string is clear, and that's more important than being brief or being terse. And so I brought an example of this one. I worked on this feature at Slack, threads, which are a thing in Slack. So in Slack, I said earlier, there's a channel, and it's like a chat room, and there are messages in it. But you can also start a little thread off of any message, just like a little common thread, like in basically any software you've seen. And the one difference the one thing that's kind of tricky about threads in Slack is that there's side conversations, but there's still this main conversation over in the channel that's still happening. And when we were working on this feature, we had a real problem. We even shipped versions internally that had this problem where conversations would go off in a thread, and the people on the channel, unless they were really on top of things and saw the thread right when it started, they would just not even know that there was this side conversation happening. And decisions would be made in side conversations, and you'd have no idea. So we needed a way to solve that. So one of our designers had a really bright idea, which is, what if we added this little checkbox in a thread that when you're writing a reply, you can check it, and then when you send your reply goes to the thread, but it also goes back to the channel, and it kind of like lets everyone know, hey, we made a decision, or something important happened here. You should have eyes on this. We're hoping that kind of closed the loop. I think it's a cool idea. Our struggle was what to call this thing. And for so long, internally, we were trying out different, really branded names for it, really like capital letters branded names, like maybe you announce this thing, maybe the label says announce to the channel, maybe it's called a broadcast. Broadcast really stuck. That's even how we call it. That's like what's referred to in the code, I'm pretty sure. So we were trying all these different branded names, and with each one of them, you'd say like, broadcast, and you have to explain it below. And it was really tricky, and nothing was really sticky, nothing really felt good. And then one night our CEO sent me a message at like 8 p.m., which was made me nervous as hell, because I don't really get messages from our CEO at 8 p.m. But we're getting close to launch, and he sent me this long message just saying like, hey, like I think we're way off on this. We shouldn't be trying to name it. We should there should just be a checkbox, and next to it is a label, and the label says, send my reply to the thread, but also send it back to the channel to keep my teammates in the loop or something. And so I read this message, and I said, it should say exactly that. And he said, no, but that should be the spirit, it should feel that way. And it was kind of a light bulb moment for me. I realized it's okay for this string, here's where he landed, also send to channel name, also send to the channel, right? It's okay to use a few words here and let this label just be the description. Clarity over brevity. Cool. So writing microcopy, 4 little rules for it. Being radically human, which just means trying to sound the way a person sounds when they talk about something. I love number 2, I think it's really important. Don't try to make moments happen. Cool. All right, let's zoom out again. I said earlier that I think that your relationship with a designer is the most important relationship. It is like that Chicago picnic. And there are a few reasons for this. So like, first of all, you and the designer, you are facing the same problems. You're the 2 people on the team that are charged with making some user experience that is seamless and imminently usable and understandable and clear. So you have this like kind of same goal, and you're trying to solve the same problems. And then also, you tend to be receiving similar feedback. Now it's obviously a little different because you're writing stuff and they're designing stuff, but it's similar in that you're on these cross-functional teams, and the feedback you get is often about constraints, like what can we build, what can't we build, what's possible in V1 and what's not. We've been to user research, and here's the things that are confusing. You're kind of taking in and absorbing the same feedback. And then finally, and this is obvious, the 2 of you are delivering in the end the same artifact, probably. You are delivering a mock together, or a design spec together. And so you're gonna be like playing in the same space and making this thing together. Now, there's one thing that makes this all tricky, and this is kind of because this feels a little new. When I started Slack, personally, there were a couple of UX writers at Slack, there were 3 of us, but none of the designers on my team had ever worked with a UX writer and didn't even really know what that would mean. And frankly, they've been doing really good design work before that. So as a writer, you're often the person who has to figure out how do we make this relationship work. And so I have 3 little tricks for that. The first one is your goal is to get to a point where you trust each other's instincts to kind of an incredible degree. And I think you can tell that you trust each other enough when the designer says like, something's not working here, I've got a bad feeling about this. Your reaction shouldn't be to say like, well, why? We figured this out last week. And your reaction shouldn't be to say, I don't know, seems fine to me. And your reaction shouldn't even be to say, what's not working. I think in a good relationship, when the designer or the writer says, this isn't working for me, the other person just says, okay, let's make it better. Because you trust the other person's instincts to the extent that like, even if they can't sort of explain what's not working, you believe that something's wrong because something's rubbing them the wrong way. Another trick here is to have fuzzy conversations. So to explain this, I have drawn a very incredible chart, highly detailed. On the left, we have the writer's skill set, and on the right, we have a designer's skill set. Now there's some natural overlap here. Both of you have instincts around UX and ideas around UX, and hopefully you're trained in it. So you have some overlapping skills, but the whole point of your partnership is to tap into the skills that you don't share, right? So like a writer has all these unique skills, like the ability to turn a phrase in a way that makes it sort of radically memorable, or writers often have a stronger sense of the information architecture of the product as a whole. Writers are often the people who have spent the most time tracking what does the user know so far and what do they need to learn now to accomplish their goal, to sort of get to the next stage. But then designers have this whole other set of skills that writers mostly can't even imagine. The ability to lay things out in a way that draws the eye to just the right place, or honestly, I think often designers have the strongest, I guess rightfully so, the strongest grasp of the design system you're working in, just the details of it, what's possible and what's not, what components exist and what they're good for. And so your whole goal is to tap into each other's skill sets to sort of bridge this gap. And to do that, I think you want to have fuzzy conversations. A fuzzy conversation is when someone goes out on a limb and tries to talk about something they don't totally understand. So for a writer, it might mean saying like, hey, I have some piece of information here that I know we need to add to this UI, we need to tell the user, but I don't see any place to put it. It doesn't really fit with this string, this paragraph. It doesn't fit here. Can you give me a new place to put it? Can you like create some little, like a square or some other, you can pick the shape, like whatever shape, can you just give me a space to put this? And the designer will say like, yeah, that's cool, yeah, I can do that. So like, here's how this looks, and this is really literally that, I guess. I worked with a wonderful designer named Matt Hodgins on a feature called Shared Channels, and don't get caught up reading this thing, but this was the creation flow, how you create a shared channel. And there's kind of a lot happening here. There's a lot of text and a lot of fields. It's for admins, so we believe they understand Slack pretty well, but still we're introducing some new concepts. And so we wound up kind of littering this UI with little learn more links, kind of all over the place. And it was okay, but it was starting to feel like every line was going to end with a little blue learn more link. It just didn't seem very scalable or sustainable. So I said to Matt, like, is there anything else we can do here? I know we're kind of cramped on space, and I don't really know what we can do within this dialog box component, but like, is there some other space we could put this thing, like kind of bring it to like just a single place for this help information? And he said, yeah, of course. These dialogues have a footer, and we can just use that. And it's great. It was a bit of a fuzzy conversation because I didn't know what I was talking about. But as soon as Matt saw what I needed, what we were aiming for, he was able to just pull out of a hat and it's find this nice solution. So yeah, fuzzy conversations. And then lastly, I've never done improv comedy. I'm not saying I shouldn't. I'm just saying I never have. But I've heard there's a rule, I hope it's real, that when you are working on a scene or you're in a scene with an improv partner, you never want to like say no to the scene they're trying to make happen. You never want to say no. You don't want to hit the brakes. You always want to say like, yes, and I'm going to build on this in some way. And I think that's kind of exactly what a good dynamic feels like between a designer and a writer, especially early in a project when you're kind of in the divergent stage and just brainstorming and figuring out where all the directions we could go or all the ways to solve this problem. I think you want this attitude. You want this willingness to just go down every pathway and kind of test out every idea. You will have silly ideas and bad ideas all the time, but sometimes by exploring those, you'll find something good. So yeah, those are my tips for working with designers. And then I wanted to give a little note here about humans. I hope you know this, but every human is unique and messy and different. And everyone wants something different out of work, like other than the salary, everyone wants different things out of work, and they want to work in different ways. And so I just encourage all of you, designers and writers alike, that when you're approaching one of these partnerships, a new design partnership for the first time, that you just try to approach it kind of with a blank slate and willing to try things and willing to figure out what's the best way for us to work together. I've worked with designers that love to collaborate by just going in a room with a whiteboard and spending an hour on the whiteboard sketching stuff out, and I love that too. I've worked with designers who needed the opposite. They needed to have a conversation and then go disappear for a couple hours while they did work and then bring something back, and that's fine too. I worked with designers that wanted me in their sketch file, moving things around, and just like, hey, do whatever, and designers who were like, I will make you a copy of the file and you can change some things and hand it back to me. And those are all fine. The point is that you want to find a way to work there where everyone's comfortable. So yeah, working with designers, a few little tips for that. Let's zoom out again. So, 2 down. I want to talk about crafting user flows next. Like I said earlier, I think this is the real work of a UX writer. I think this is where UX writing differentiates itself from copywriting. And I think this is also where, as a UX writer, you can kind of bring the most value to your team or your company. And you do it in a few ways. As a UX writer, you kind of have a responsibility to try to keep the product conceptually simple. And you can't do it alone. Many people on the team need to be thinking about this, especially on the product side. But you have a responsibility to do your best to keep the product conceptually simple. But at the same time, individual user flows, you want to actually let them be as complicated as they need to be. We'll dig into that weirdness in a second. And then finally, of course, you should choose the best words. That's a good thing to do. So keeping the product conceptually simple. have a little story here. I have a friend named Charles, and Charles lives in Los Angeles. For some context, I used to live in LA, and I used to work in film and TV. And my friend Charles still does. So whenever I go down to LA, I like getting coffee with him, and I like to just talk to him about his life, because it is now so different from mine, and hear what he's up to. But let's see, I guess it was over the summer. I was in LA, and I met with Charles, and it was a very different conversation. His little production company had just started using Slack, and he knew I worked on it, so he wanted to talk about it, and really wanted to talk about it. So I was like, okay, let's do this. I decided earlier on in the conversation, I'm not gonna correct him. I just wanted to see how he would talk about the product. And what was interesting is earlier I told you in Slack you have channels, and each channel is kind of a topic, and you can work in there. So Charles was describing how his production company uses Slack, and he said, so yeah, we have our Slack, and in Slack we have Slack, you know, and then we have the sub Slacks. And we sort of a sub Slack for each project. And I was sitting there thinking, like, what is happening right now? And it turned out, like, what he meant was the general channel he called Slack, and then the other Slack channels were sub Slacks. Once I realized that, I was like, fine, cool. And you know, I don't. Channels is the key piece of jargon. It's the one we have, the key piece of jargon for using Slack. And I don't think that Charles didn't know it. He just couldn't recall it in that conversation, most likely. But still, it was really kind of an interesting moment, because it made me realize, like, this is the one piece of jargon we think our users surely won't know, and yet here's a guy who's super excited about the product, wants to talk about it, and can't remember it. So yeah, because of this, I like to think about adding nouns and avoiding it mostly. You should only add new sort of proper nouns to your product as a last resort. It's better to add an adjective to modify a noun you already have. It's better to add a verb if you have to, but only add nouns as a last resort. Each one is going to be something new that your users have to learn and kind of internalize. At the same time, when it comes to sort of individual user flows, you're trying to keep them, or let them be, I guess, as complicated as they need to be. So I think there's this misconception about UX writers, and partly because the field is new. There's this idea that UX writers, what they do is they write copy, they clean it up, they make it better, maybe they inject some brand voice into the thing, and that's it. And I don't really think that's the job at all. UX writers, our responsibility is to try to create the space for better language, create a flow where better language, clearer language will explain it. And kind of use language as this lens to critique user flows. And we do that by rethinking, reworking, and redesigning the flows that we're tasked with. So, for example, as a UX writer, if you were given a dialog box like this and asked to rewrite it, like look at this dialog box, there's a few things happening here. If you just read the title, you think you're just moving a meeting, but once you dig in, you realize you're also sending a notification to a lot of people. This is the kind of thing that as a UX writer, you might be asked, like, hey, can you rewrite this so that it's more clear what's happening? And the answer is like, yeah, I could rewrite it a little bit, but really, like, too much is happening here. In a single click, you're doing too many things. That's a dangerous little dialog box you've got. And in fact, as a UX writer, your job is to suggest something different. To say like, hey, let's split this up, let's break this down, let's make this a few steps. And you're gonna get pushback. You're gonna hear that you're making things more complicated. And you totally are. You're making things appropriately complicated. But appropriately complicated is what we should be aiming for. We should be aiming for software where each click does the one thing you knew it would do. There's like a nice sense of safety that comes with that, and a sense of being in control of the software. So yeah, keeping things appropriately complicated. And then this is a big idea. When you're writing for a user flow, you should never be writing for just the screen you're on right now. You should never be just working on that screen. You need to be figuring out what language works for the whole flow. What reads the most natural through this whole thing. And so often you should write for the flow before you've done wireframes, before you've done any mocks. It can often be useful to just kind of write through, like, what is the conversation like that the user's having with this flow? Now there is kind of a trick to this. I wanted to talk about an example. So I worked on this free trial offer for Slack, and it kind of worked like this. You got an email that looks like this, and if you click that start a free trial button, then you could start a trial of the paid Slack experience. So pretty straightforward. There were a few ways this flow could go. So a user receives the email, and then maybe they get the email and they can accept it, and they do, and they accept it. Done. Another thing that can happen is that a user could receive the email but not actually have permission to accept it, to start a free trial on behalf of their Slack team. And then there was even a third thing that can happen. A user could receive the email and not be allowed to start a trial, but they were allowed to pass the offer on to someone else who could then start it. So that was scary and clunky. And so on this project, at first, I knew I wanted to write for the whole flow, so at first I got in there and I was like, okay, that top one looks easy, I'll write that right now. And I wrote it, and it was, I guess, fine. And then I started working on the edge cases, and I realized, this is not, this language I had chosen, the way I'd chosen to talk about this thing, it wasn't really working out for the edge cases very well. They felt super clunky. Maybe it's okay, right? They're edge cases. But there's sort of a catch here. I started with the simplest pathway, but really you should be starting with the most common. And this was a weird nightmare, but it turned out in this project, the most common thing that would happen by far was that third weird flow, where someone gets the email, they're not allowed to do anything with it, but they can pass it on. And so I started over from scratch, and I wrote for that flow. And I actually wound up using pretty different language, maybe in ways that feel subtle, but I introduced a noun, I introduced invitation, this is your invitation. And that way, by using a noun, I kind of made it into an object, I think, in the user's head. So then with an object, you can do things to it, you can pass it along. That makes much more sense. And that extra noun, it wasn't really needed in the other pathways, really. It was an extra word that I could have gotten away without. But since this is the most common one, I just optimized for that and let the actual edge cases, which were the simpler things, sort of deal with the language. Cool. Crafting user flows. So yeah, you have a few responsibilities here as a UX writer. You're trying to keep the product conceptually simple, but you're trying to let user flows be as complicated as they need to be to kind of feel safe and feel predictable. You should always be writing for the whole flow and not just a single screen. And then finally, you want to start with the most common path and not just the one that's easiest for you. Cool. Let's zoom out again. So I want to talk about establishing a UX team. And I'm going to talk about how we did it at Slack. I'm sure there are other and maybe better ways to establish a team. And how you try to establish one of these teams is going to depend on how much buy-in is there amongst the stakeholders of your company. How much do they know what UX writers do already? So this is what we did. I'm sure there are other ways to do this, and I hope that I'll hear from people who tell me ways to do it much better, but here's what we did. When I started at Slack, there were 3 UX writers, or 3 of us, and the other 2 had been there just a couple months, and no one knew what we did, or what we were for, or what UX writing was. And so we started by taking requests. We kind of set up in a sort of agency way. We set ourselves up inside the company, and we created a channel that's called Please UI Writing. Anyone could kind of drop in there and bring us a request, and we would just help them. We'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll write that thing for you. We wound up writing lots of things that were not what we thought sort of fell within our job description. But it was a great way to meet people and a great way to get on sort of the radar of people at the company. It had some downsides. So, for example, we didn't really have any control over our schedule. Our schedule was just, we're at work now, let's see what happens in the channel today. People would drop in and be like, here's a thing you can work on. But that wasn't great. There's a lot of context switching, it kind of felt like rapid fire, just vastly different requests coming in. But I think a big downside here was that it did give, I think, our coworkers the wrong impression of what a UX writer does. So earlier I said UX writers, they create space for better language. They redesign a flow so it can be explained more easily and more clearly. And this gave the opposite impression, I think. This gave the impression that UX writers, they edit, they write something that is charming or fun, or they make the writing a little better. And then there was one really big downside. So this is the life of a project. A project kicks off and then later it ships, and it's just that easy. Where do people get looped in? A project manager, they're kind of there for the beginning, right? A designer comes in a little later, and then they're there to kind of see the thing through. Engineers start kind of at some point here. And in this first sort of agency model of working, UX writers, we were getting looped in way at the very end. And that was tough because we were being asked to solve problems, like interaction problems with words. And the truth is, if you come to us with a confusing interaction, I can explain it, but it'll still be confusing. I'm just gonna make it very clear the ways, like, yeah, you're not wrong, this is confusing, user. It's confusing in these ways. Keep going. It's a Band-Aid, it's not a real fix. And we realized we needed to move, that example earlier, we were suggesting things that were more complicated and being told like, no, we're shipping next week. It's too late for any of that. So we knew we needed to move earlier in this process, right? And we needed to change the way we work. So we kind of disbanded the agency. While it was super fun to just be working, the three of us writers, we disbanded and we took a really new approach. We actually partnered with designers. I think we did this for two reasons. First of all, like I said earlier, the designer is the most important relationship you have. So it made sense to partner with them. But also, we were just really good friends with the designers at Slack. We got along with them really well. And so we knew they would help us. And we had this idea where, how about on every feature, there's a designer and a writer, and they're in every meeting together. They're always there together. And when the designers would be in a meeting where the PM hadn't invited the writer, they'd say like, hey, let's reschedule, the writer's not here. So we, in that kind of crafty way, embedded ourselves in the feature teams and got looped in way earlier, right alongside the designer. This is a great way to work. I actually think it's possible this is the ideal way to work, if you can kind of sustain it. We really found a groove here. I think it was really good. And there was a while where everything that shipped from Slack had a writer looking at it, which felt great. Now there were some downsides to this. So one is just that there still was a lot of context switching because they're just always, back then and now, and every company I've ever talked with, there are always more designers than writers. So you're kind of bouncing between projects a lot. And then the other big problem was that Slack was growing as a company a lot at the time. And when a company grows, at first they add 300 people, but they don't actually get any more work done. And then eventually they figure out how to work together and how to be efficient, and they start working on things in parallel, and suddenly they're shipping way more. And when that ramp up hit, suddenly we kind of couldn't keep up. We were shipping seriously rough drafts or even first drafts. We would just write something once and say like, yeah, yes, go. And that didn't feel very good. So we know we need to change the way we work again. And we've started on this. I think we kind of slowly figured this out. I think that next we're gonna get more choosy a little bit. Instead of covering everything, we're trying to pick just the projects where we can contribute the most. And right now often that means we're only focusing on projects where the stakeholders involved, the PMs and designers involved, are interested in taking a content-first approach to it. Where the first stuff we work on is not wireframes and mocks. The first stuff we work on is writing a user narrative and then kind of illustrating it. Or the first stuff we work on is figuring out an information architecture for a whole part of the product. So places where we can work content first, where we can try some more experimental ways of designing, we're getting more choosy and maybe focusing on those some. And then the other thing we're doing is we're starting to create sort of this menu of services so that for all the features we're not supporting, what is the stuff we can do for those folks? So this might mean at the beginning of a project, sitting down with the PM and kind of helping them come up with a lexicon for that project, and also just sort of giving them a few handy phrases we think they'll use a lot. If we have a sense of you're gonna run into this weird state you'll have to describe, here's how we describe it. And you can just take that phrase and tweak it and run with it, giving them some language to start with, some bricks to kind of build with. And then maybe at the end coming back in and editing or something. But we're testing out this menu of services and different things we can do for the project we're not covering. Cool. And then I guess I just want to emphasize that we really don't know what we're doing. We're talented people, but I think, and I work with some incredibly smart people, but we're making this up as we go. And it's a new field, it's a growing field, we're just trying stuff. Sometimes we try really things that just fall flat on their face, right? And sometimes they work. And also, as our company grows, I expect that we will change again and again the way we work. There are actually some things about the new way we're working, some things like office hours that feel like it's drifting back towards the agency model that we started with. And that's fine. We expect things to change. So, cool. Establishing your team. This is how we've done it. There are other ways to do it. I think that's the universe. At the end of the powers of 10, it very rapidly zooms back down all the way through the levels of scale, all the way back down to planet Earth. And I guess we should do that really quick. So, quick little summary. We started with the irreducible particle, with writing microcopy. There's nothing smaller than this. And some rules for doing it well. Being radically human. Clarity over brevity, despite how counterintuitive it might feel. And then we zoomed out to working with designers. I think this is the most important relationship you have, and some ways to make that relationship work. Then we zoomed out again, crafting user flows. That is really where UX writing becomes UX writing and not just copywriting. And so you have some responsibilities there, I think, as a UX writer. This is the job description, I think. We talked about keeping the product conceptually simple, only adding nouns as a last resort. It's kind of a big thing. And then we zoomed out again, talk about how to establish a UX writing team if that's something you're interested in, and how we did it at Slack. So cool. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Yay.
Thank
you.